Angie's upcoming book, the Global Rockstar Album, 21 Verses to Find Your Tact as an Inclusive Leader. Angie has been working for many years as a global mobility manager. Now she has her own company, Global People Transitions. And Rajeev has over 12 years of experience in the software industry. He has been an expat himself as well. He has worked in 15 countries on 3 continents, through Europe, Africa, and Pacific Asia. And now I am going to give Rajeev the opportunity to ask Angie some questions about her newest publication and maybe some other topics as well. So please, to you, Rajeev.
Sure. Thanks, Camilla. Thanks a lot for that. So, yeah. So, hi, Angie. Nice to have you on this podcast session today. Maybe I'll start a bit about our journey. When we met first, it's around 12 years approximately. And that is my total career. I would say my career also spans across 12 years. So yeah. So I remember, if I remember correctly, we discussed about how do I kind of focus into my career, especially into international business. And as a coach, I think a lot of feedback from your side, and and we have been interacting throughout these years across when I was in any of the locations, be it Africa, be it Europe, be it I've been in touch with you. We have discussed so much, and I'm quite excited and happy that to hear about your new book. I understand this would be a 4th book. I know that last 3 books which you released, the Global Rockstar Album, the Global Mobility Workbook, and the Global Career Workbook, had a lot of inputs. Had a lot of pointers for the population or for the corporates who want to go career internationally, right? Mm-hmm. I would want to know a bit about your experience. I mean, your thought about your this new book. What is it all about? How can it help people growing their career in international arena, right? So if you could help, if you could start with knowing a bit more about this book, and then maybe we delve down more to know about your leadership journey and other points.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Rajeev, the book is actually been born out of my over 12 years of experience as an executive coach and working mainly with expatriates and internationally mobile professionals who usually, let's say in midlife, they start to ask themselves some critical questions. And so I always say it's for everybody who is above 35 and works across the globe or leads an international team. What happens in that stage of life is that, you might not be as, let's say, goal-oriented anymore as you were in the beginning of your career. So right now, you're a director, you have reached a certain level of your career, and maybe you're asking yourself a few questions about what is my purpose in this world? What can I contribute to make the world a better place? And how can I do that? And that usually also triggers the need for finding a coach and getting supported. Another thing that, with expats, it's very important to understand, they usually have, as you know, let's say usually a 3-year assignment period. And then after the 2nd year, there's always the question, what am I going to do next? So I'm also trying to help expats manage their international career better by developing an app, the RockMe app. That's been my basically life project since I left the corporate world, where they can have an international career and build build the basis for the next role, no matter where it's going to be. If it's in the same company, if they're repatriating, if they go to another company. So that's the basic inspiration comes from my clients and wanting to help more people than just the ones that work directly with me.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So yeah, so Angie, I mean, I'm just curious. I know that you started your career with Deutsche Bank, and you worked there for quite a while as a human resource vice president. I think when you left, then you joined, a lot of other companies as well. And while I'm curious to know what there was your leadership roles in each of these companies, but a bit before that, I would want to, understand where did this entire leadership thing start? And way back when you were in school and college, and how it all, started. So that you and I was just going to your LinkedIn profile. And I saw that you say female founder, and that quite evident, not all your biography and other places as well. So where did it all start? The entire leadership journey. And in your view, what is leadership all about? If you could.
So I think, Rajeev, I've always been a leader. If, in the sense that I think leadership is not just a manager. I was also a manager when I was working at PwC. I managed people in the global mobility field. But I think the leadership started a lot earlier. Even in high school, I was always organizing things, leading, for example, our final year cabaret, I was the main creative head behind our final year cabaret. It was like a show. Or in university, I was president of a student organization called ISEC. So, this is an organization that basically helps with international understanding by organizing internships across the world. Okay. I just met last night a friend that was in our internship program. She came to Zurich with her husband and her child. She met her husband on the internship program. But the reason why this friendship is so special to me is that, I don't know if you know this because you're living in India, but there was a war in Europe in the 90s in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. And this young woman, she was like the president of the ISEC committee of Bosnia. We met at an international conference and we organized an internship for her at Siemens Nixdorf, which is an IT company in Paderborn, where I went to university. And she was actually flown out of the country with a UN helicopter. I'm getting very emotional when I talk about this. And then, she met her husband in Paderborn. And yesterday they presented me their 20-year-old son as well, who's now studying back in Sarajevo, which I think, I don't know, it's just like an amazing circle. And I also noticed that a lot of my long-term friendships stem from that time at university, from ISEC and from all the things that we experienced together.
Yeah. I think this story is quite touching, and that actually brings me, to the point, the larger point of global, leadership. So in current scenario, and that too post-pandemic, when things have become more virtual, right? Meetings have gone virtual. People are not meeting in person. Till now, I would say, still the offices are yet to kind of operate in a normal fashion where people go to office and then have these meetings. So things have changed. Interactions have changed. So what would be your top three, I would say, challenges which you see in today's scenario, in this global leadership, so people cannot move from one place to another? What are the three challenges leadership face, and how can they overcome those challenges as well? What would be your view about it?
Well, in the book, we refer to the theory of James Cassio on the BANI world, BANI, that stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. So this is basically the next stage from what was formerly called the VUCA world. So, in my work in global mobility, we're confronted with all global traumas that are going on. Ever since September 11th, I was always, whenever there was like an issue going on in the world, we were in the middle of it, because Obviously, in global mobility, we deal with expats across the world. Fukushima, yeah, you name it, I had an expat there. So we are always getting really involved in all of these topics. So I think we're learning to be crisis managers. And we're dealing with a lot of these crises on a natural basis. And I know that this causes a lot of stress, not only for global mobility managers, but also for expats, for leaders. And the first thing I think, we usually deal with when an expat starts coaching with me is their stress level. And this is also how the book basically starts. Because I feel like you cannot really work on your, life vision, your next goals, your short-term goals, long-term goals, your bucket list, if you're feeling completely in the middle of the hamster wheel. Yeah, so first of all, we try to get the managers out of the hamster wheel before they can even think about what it means to become a leader. So this is the starting point. This is basically the first 7 verses of the book. You probably understood already. The book is written like a song. Yeah, so it has verses. It has a refrain. It has an intro, outro, and we're referring a lot to music and bands.
And it has got some mention about your India experience.
Yeah. Well, I always say, and I'm not sure if I told you this, but I always say that going to India when I was working at Deutsche Bank to help in an outsourcing project, this was for me like one of the most eye-opening experiences of my career. I think it was a game changer. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, first of all, I had a lot of misconceptions in my mind. Yeah, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go there and help people. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I also understood, especially when I went to hold a guest lecture at university, how we underestimate the intelligence and the talent in India. So, I had a bet going with somebody. I said, they're going to run us over. If we continue, like in Germany and Switzerland, if we continue to work like we do, in 5 to 10 years, we don't have a chance. The talent is going to come and run over and colonize us. Revenge of colonization. I think I'm right about this. Yeah. So so it was an eye-opening experience.
And that too must be for other countries as well, where you visited, right? Each of these countries will have their own unique challenge, which
Yeah, I think, every time I went abroad, obviously, I went through culture shock. I went through the whole curve, learned more about my misconceptions. I learned more about other people. I think I also learned how to deal with people from many different cultural backgrounds, build trust with people from many different cultural backgrounds. And this is something that is not a given, and that I also don't take lightly. Yeah, so that I find it amazing that I have friends all over the world, and that that I can talk to people across the world. Yeah.
Okay. That actually brings me to a thought. I was just thinking, why it is becoming more important every day to become an inclusive leader, which is like one of the most critical topics in global industry, if I talk about.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's an important point today, an important requirement?
I don't want to talk about everything that is in the book because I still want people to read it. Yeah. But I think, first of all, we talked a little bit about the issues that we have in the world: global pandemic, global warming. We see all of these, poverty, hunger, basically everything the UN addressed with the 17 SDG goals. And I think we all want to do our part. And as I said, in global mobility, we probably always have been a bit closer to these topics than in the rest of, let's say, HR or in finance. We might not see when you just work in some of these areas, you might not see these issues so closely. So I personally think that global mobility managers they can support these topics better because they know how to deal with, as I said, with crisis, but also expats and global nomads. They're more experienced in those issues and dealing with those issues. They have more of an open mind. And becoming an inclusive leader, I think, is important also because of talent acquisition, talent retention. Everybody has been talking about the war for talent for the last 20 years. Now it's finally here. Yeah, we're looking for talent everywhere. We're trying to integrate talent into our teams, and we have different generations at work, and everybody's struggling. Yeah, like everybody's struggling with the needs of Generation Z, for example. Elderly leaders like myself, they struggle with technology. Younger people don't feel that they belong to an organization. You mentioned the working from home, the debate about, does it make a difference or not? It does make a difference if you're never in the office, because you don't have the feeling of belonging. And belonging is one of the reasons why people stay. Yeah, why they stay in your organization. So obviously, being an inclusive leader is a critical, I would say it's probably the most critical thing to learn as a leader, as well as intercultural competence, which, is also a part of our work and our book. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does answer. Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. So, while, I know that we are short in time already, but, why don't we end today's session with a brief about why, what are the, top 3 pointers, one could keep in mind to achieve from this book, from your this new book. What are the if you can tell us something about that, what would this book at a high level would cover?
I think, first of all, everybody should read the book who is an expat or global nomad and currently asking themselves those bigger questions, like, why am I here? Is it right what I'm doing? What is my purpose in the world? Second, I would say if you feel like you're constantly, as a leader or manager, your team members quit on you. That is another reason why you should read the book, because maybe you're not inclusive enough. Maybe you're not providing psychological safety. Maybe your team members do not trust you. And maybe that's why they don't perform. Maybe it has nothing to do with them. Maybe it has more to do with you. So that would be the second kind of reason for reading the book. And I think the third reason is, if you're working in a field like myself as a HR professional, diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, coach, then you should also read the book. I need to take a sip of water. Does that help? Camilla,
Yeah, it does.
Any other ideas?
I would say from my own perspective, my personal perspective, so far I have been not an expat, but an international student. And I think I have read it before, actually, that this book should be not only for people plus 35, but I think for everyone who is dealing with those kind of issues, because I have read this book, obviously, many times, actually. And many of those points that are supposed to be for the people who are older than me, they actually do resonate with me as well, on maybe on a different level. But still, I think the target audience is just everyone who actually have dealt with going abroad for a longer time, or dealing even with the cultural shock, because I think it's even more, universal. So this is what I would make a point of.
And it's maybe also important to say, the book is very condensed. Rajeev, you probably saw some of my other books. It's a very action-oriented book. So it's for people with a shorter attention span, like us, like people who cannot take in a lot of information at the time, but they can say, oh, here, 5 action items that I need to, think about if I want to do X, Y, Z. And then there's a repetition, which is like a homework, something you can practice, and then you can move on to the next chapter. Yeah.
So I already have one of the reasons out of the three you mentioned, because of which I would want to look forward to read this book. Yeah. So that brings us, I think, to the end of this session. Thanks a lot, Angie, Camilla, for setting this up. It was really nice talking to you and getting your insights as always. And I will look forward, for this official release of the book. If you can share, when is it officially you are announcing the release? Is it already released, or
No, the official launch date is the 28th of September. So we're going to have a party in Zurich on the 26th of September. And we're still checking if we can bring out the ebook and the print book at the same time, because we got a lot of feedback from readers, like pre-readers, testers, that they would like to see a print version. So I cannot confirm the print release date, but I can confirm the ebook release date.
Great. We'll look forward to the release. Thank you, Angela. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
And thank you, Rajeev, for asking the questions.
Thank you, Rajeev.
Thanks, Angela.